In the late 18th century, the streets of Paris were filled with people, hungry and angry, expressing their disappointment with the government. The seed of discontent had been planted by King Louis XVI and clergy for decades. The French people had labored so hard under the oppressive administration of the monarchy, emboldened by the clergy and upper class, both of whom were very indifferent to the suffering of the common people. In the 18th century, the king resided in the opulent place of Versailles. The French society was divided into three classes: the clergy, the upper class, and the common people. The common people were the majority and had been overburdened with taxes, were crushed by famine, and had little political influence. They were voiceless, and the king, the clergy, and the upper class cared less about their well-being. While the church preached how true riches could be found in heaven, people went through untold suffering, and the Catholic Church amassed wealth on earth. The king's authority and power was considered divine and never to be challenged by anyone. The clergy and upper class had privileges and significant influence over how the king governed France, but chose to ignore the cries of the common people. To add pepper and salt on the injury, the Queen Marie Antoinette did not even advise or plead with the king to pay attention to the needs of the common people. Drunk with power and pride, lost in thoughts and words, she became unpopular in France due to her extravagant lifestyle that she openly flaunted. Many also saw her as the enemy of people for her perceived foreign influence and links seen to undermine the lives of the common people in France. In those days, it was alleged that when people complained about the high price of bread, the Queen had told the French people to eat cake if bread was unavailable, which demonstrated the extent to which she was out of touch with the social inequality in the society. In the rural areas of France, peasants toiled in vain, their crops failed, and they were hungry and angry. In the cities, artisans and workers were unemployed or underemployed, and the few that earned an income, they were overburdened with taxes, causing mass starvation of people. The untold desperation among the common people grew, and in a very short time, the eyes of the people opened, and they saw the deceit from the king, the clergy, and the upper class. They filled the streets crying for change, hoping their thirst new way of governance would be quenched, but everything grew out of their hands. The difficulties in their life in 1789 was caused by many things, but the major one was that France was in dire financial crisis due to excessive debt, inefficient taxation, extravagant and unnecessary spending by the monarchy, which was also exacerbated by the king's decision to invest financial resources at the expense of his people into the American Revolution, which was considered a very expensive war and unnecessary to the people. Instead of King Louis XVI cutting down the costs of the monarchy, he and the Queen and monarchy in general took an arrogant stance, continued to live large as people suffered. Drunk and blinded by the unchallengeable power as king, he turned his back on his people to please the Americans. In his mind, he must have thought the people were powerless and helpless and had no choice but to obey and fear him. In 1789, he called for a meeting between the monarchy, the clergy, the commoners. But the commoners, fed up with suffering, and because they had received enlightenment that they formed 98% of the French population, they made some demands. They demanded to be heard, saying they wanted a say into their destiny and were tired of being silenced. They must have been asking to be involved in they were governed and in deciding on how their taxes would be spent. Instead, the prideful clergy and powerful king locked the common people representatives out the meeting hall on the 20th of June 1789. The representatives of the people gathered in a nearby tennis court, and they took a tennis court oath, vowing not to leave until they had drafted a new constitution for France. This act of defiance was the first bold stroke of the French people to freedom through the French Revolution. As time went by, the professionals in among the people began educating the population about their rights. Among the common people were philosophers like Voltaire, Rousseau, and Montesquieu, who also promoted ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity to the general populace. They questioned the social and political order that existed then in France, and how they funded people who would only use their money to live large with no accountability. To demonstrate how serious they were, in July of 1789, the common people, driven by hunger and anger, filled the streets and stormed the Bastille, a grim fortress that symbolized royal tyranny. Bastille was built in the late 14th century during the 100 Years of War. During the time of King Louis XVI, Bastille was a symbol of absolute monarch, which was used as the king's state prison. The fall of the Bastille was a signal to the world that the people of France had become free and would no longer be shackled by the chains of oppression. As it fell, the streets ran red with the blood of revolutionaries and royalists alike, but hope burned bright in the hearts of people. Those that the monarchy had deleted were seen as the ultimate sacrifice to save many, and they remained heroes. The living did not surrender in fear, they soldiered on. In the wake of the Bastille's fall and the loss of heroes of revolution, hope and anger emboldened people, and a wave of revolutionary enthusiasm swept across France. Based on the constitution the people had drafted, a National Assembly was formed, which played a role representing the voice of the people. An effort that began to dismantle the old primitive order of the monarchy, the clergy, and the upper class. They abolished the privileges of the upper class and the clergy, proclaiming the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. Liberty, equality, and fraternity became the rallying cry of a new France. But the path to freedom was very shaky. Famine and economic turmoil continued to plague the country, and people almost gave up. As fear and paranoia took hold, revolutionary leaders like Maximilien Robespierre emerged, driven by an unyielding desire to protect the revolution at any cost. Robespierre was a prominent leader who was opposed to the monarchy, and although he initially gained traction among many, people lost faith in him when he started championing mass deletions of people who were perceived to be against the revolution. Due to his belief in reign of terror to get to destiny, between September 1793 and 1794, many people were deleted. This period is considered one of the darkest moments of the revolution, which led to suspicion and supreme vengeance. He became a sign of the excesses of the revolution, as opposed to being a champion. On the 28th of July 1794, Robespierre was deleted by guillotine, marking the end of a dark period of the revolution. In 1791, the National Assembly adopted the constitution they had drafted, limiting the powers of the monarchy. The king, feeling very humiliated, and due to mistrust in the monarchy, tried together with his family to escape France. The revolutionists arrested them in the town of Varennes, which led to further loss of trust and respect for the monarchy. The failed escape led to the king and his family being placed under house arrest in the Tuileries Palace in Paris. By 1792, the monarchy was abolished and the king was detained in the Temple, a medieval fortress in Paris. The king was charged for conspiracy and subversion. He made attempts to defend himself, but a near-unanimous vote found him guilty. He received the death penalty, and without reprieve he was informed that he would be executed. He painfully spent his last hours writing prayers, confessions, and letters to his family. He had requested to see his family one more time, a last time that was very tearful and emotional, a moment of farewell that he would never have imagined during the time when he had the ultimate power over the common people. Early morning, 21st January 1793. King Louis was taken from his cell in the temple and was transported to the Place de la Révolution, now known as Place de la Concorde, where the guillotine was erected. He wore a simple white shirt, and alongside him was his confessor, Abbe Edgeworth de Firmont. When he reached the scaffold, King Louis XVI attempted to address the crowd, proclaiming his innocence and expressing his hope that his death would bring peace to France. But the crowd was too loud that his speech was drowned out by the drumming of the National Guard. He was restrained by the executioners and placed on the guillotine, and at exactly 22 minutes past 10 in the morning, the blade fell and King Louis XVI was deleted. His body was taken away and was buried in unmarked grave. The Americans that he had spent all the money of the French people supporting their revolution never came to his rescue. He left this world a humiliated man. Queen Marie Antoinette was separated from her son Louis Charles, who was taken away from her. She was detained in August of 1793 in the Conciergerie, a grim prison known as the Antechamber. 14th October 1793, Marie Antoinette was found guilty of conspiracy against the state and inappropriate relationship with her son, and even though she defended herself, her fate had already been determined. She was sentenced to death penalty, and in her final hours she was allowed to write a final letter to her sister-in-law, Madame Elizabeth, which was full of emotion. But the sad thing is that the letter never reached the intended receiver. The day of her demise, she wore a white dress and had cut her hair short to facilitate the process of her execution. To humiliate her in her last moments of living in this earth, she was transported to the Place de la Concorde in an open cart, exposing her to the crowd that jeered. Before her execution, she accidentally stepped on the executioner's foot, but quickly apologized, saying, "Pardon me, sir, I did not do it on purpose." At 12:15 the afternoon of October 16, 1793, the blade fell, and she was taken away and buried next to her husband in unmarked grave. The revolution changed France forever, and even though it was not easy to establish a transparent government for people afterwards, it marked a new beginning for the French people. The French people fought so hard to find the soul of their nation, and their courage inspired countless other movements for freedom and justice in the country and beyond France. The ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity become a beacon for oppressed peoples in and beyond France.